please feel free to stick stuff in there. What was I going to say? Yeah, so if you haven't already completed this survey for outcome measure 5, again, you'll hear a bit more about that later on. There's a link in the chat to a smart survey. So that'd be really good if you could, if you haven't already filled it in, complete that. You'll need a piece of paper, A4 printer paper, or some gas bill, court summons, something that you are not precious about for a fun game later on. And also, just to reiterate that we're also going to be using slido.com. So I've put a link in the chat as well. And to access our little part of that, you need to enter the tag PHM leads. And there's currently a question up there saying, describe how you're feeling right now. Busy. Take it easy. Lovely morning ahead. If anyone wants to describe what snacks they've got, we could maybe play top trumps of snacks for the next 2 minutes. I haven't got any snacks. So I can see loads of people are coming on, so that's really good. I was slightly worried that a data session might have turned people off, but it hopefully we're getting lots of people on, 30 odd people so far. That's great. No snacks for Alison. Neighbourhood teams have always got snacks. So there's the agenda for the morning. Hopefully the headings of the little sections will pique your interest. Right, well, it's 9 o'clock. We have a fun-packed agenda, so I'm going to kick off. So hopefully you can all hear me all right. So on screen, I've just shared my screen. This is the agenda for the day. As I said, we're going to use slido.com. If you want to interact over there, then use the hashtag PHM leads. If you are a tweeter, also use the hashtag PHM leads if you wish. You don't have to. We're going to be using, obviously, so we're using Teams. So we've got this. So those of you that have been on before, we've got this main room or the main hall, and we've also got some breakout rooms, which hopefully will be available a bit later when we do our group exercises. Please feel free to use the chat, ask questions, raise your hand. I don't mind if you want to chip in, come off mute. Probably best off if you are on mute for the sessions. But as I say, if you want to chip in, ask questions, that's cool too. Using Slido, there will be some videos to watch, and we're going to be recording the main hall session. So again, if you want to opt out of that, that's absolutely fine. Just let us know. So there's just the slido.com web address. If you want to open a separate window on your computer or on your phone, there'll be some questions up there. So we've got, first question was, using one word, describe how you're feeling right now. I've got way too many windows open here. Where's it gone? Oh, I don't know. There we go. So in answer to the first question, describe how you're feeling right now. There's a range of excellent responses. So thank you very much for that. And again, if you want to just find that and perhaps tell us which local care partnership you're from, that's fine too. Whoa, that's just, yeah, okay. So that's great. Thank you very much for that. We'll come back to that. And again, I'll switch those questions off in a second and you'll be able to post some questions on there. If you see a question that you like, if you are familiar with how Facebook works, you can like the question, and the more likes the question gets, it goes to the top of the list, and we will come back to those and answer them a bit later. So, which local care partnership are you part of? We've gone to that. And then I'm going to switch those off. And as I say, just post any questions you have in there or in the chat. It's up to you. So first thing that we're going to do is you were all set some homework. If anyone can come up with a slightly less scholarly name for homework, then please feel free. So I'm going to hand over to Kim, who's going to just lead us through some feedback on your homework. So over to you, Kim. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. So as a reminder, we were asked to do a number of different things last time. So I appreciate different local care partnerships will have got to different places with each of these. So firstly, in preparation for this data meeting, we'd ask people to start to think about their cohort. So using the data that you've got already, are you starting to see what you might want to look at as part of your intervention? So are there things that you're an outlier for compared to the rest of Leeds? Are there certain things that you're wanting to understand a bit more about with your population? So that was the first one that we gave you as an ask. The second thing we asked you to do was look at that biopsychosocial model. So if you remember last time, Neil talked us through that model and he shared his experiences with his gran. So he talked about his gran's health and biologically how that affected her, what conditions she had and who she needed in her life to support her and help her to manage those conditions. But then also from a psychological perspective, that she had worry, anxiety, was maybe concerned about things like security and safety. And again, thinking about who in her life was helping to support her with that. But then finally, we heard about the things that for her were the most important, which was the sociological aspect, that she was a widow with a close family and that she loved to play bowls, but that because of her physical condition, she wasn't any longer able to play bowls. But that because of her friends and family and that network, she was still able to take part. So she was able to help make the tea, help mark the bowling cards for people and still be very much part of that community that was important to her. And again, the ask back to yourselves was starting to think about your cohort and think about the people that you've got in your local care partnership, then who are the really key people that can support that cohort that you might be working with around some of their interests and activities and what's important to them. So that was something we asked you to go away and as local care partnerships start to really think about for your area. And then finally, Anna and David talked us through some work that they'd been doing in Crossgates around asset mapping and how to produce an asset map in a virtual world. So we asked you to give a bit of thought to whether that's something that would be helpful for your local care partnership. So what we're wanting to do now is just get a bit of an overview from each local care partnership in turn on how you've got on since that last workshop. So it might be that you've focused very much on one of those exercises. I know a number of people have managed to take a break and a bit of leave, so we've had some quite bitty time in between with different people being around and then not being available, but we're very interested to know how each local care partnership got on and what you focused on. So once again, I'm going to come to each local care partnership in turn. Crossgates, I'm going to be starting with you. So if your nominee can start to think about what you want to say, and then to give everybody else an idea of where they're coming, I'm going to come to Otley and Airborough after that, then to Morley, then to Wetherby, and then I'm going to finish with Armley. So Crossgates, do you have somebody that was going to give your feedback for you?
Hi, it's Harpal. I was going to do the feedback. Shall I just share our screen?
Brilliant. Go for it, Harpal. Yes, please.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that. Thanks.
Yep. So my name's Harpal. I'm from the Crossgates LCP. So we've identified our cohort as the moderate frail with type 2 diabetes and those that are taking 10 or more medicines. There's quite we've chosen a specific area because we feel like we can involve the tertiary structure a little bit more. We've made our biopsycho and social table here, just sort of identifies it. If you can have a look at the table, so we've got the black writing, which is our primary support, so the GPs, pharmacy, social workers. We've also got the blue sections, which are areas that we can look to involve more. So we've got active leads, 1U leads, just to help increase our social aspects, such as exercise. And in the red writing, we've got the areas that we're currently missing and working on. So we're trying to establish links with the diabetes nurses and the local community pharmacies, and that's going to help build our bio. And as Anna and David did last time in our last session, they talked about the asset mapping. So that's pretty much where we are at the moment. Don't know how much more feedback you require. Is that okay?
That's great. Thanks, Harpal. So it sounds like you guys have made a really good start in thinking about that cohort and starting to narrow it down to what sounds like a manageable group of people to work with. And it's good that you started to identify some of the key partners that you're going to want to have involved in that as well. Really great progress for where we need you to be at this kind of time in the programme. So yes, thanks for sharing. So I'm moving to Otley and Yeadon next. Chris, looking at the chat and the thumbs up from somebody else, have you kind of self-nominated on this one?
Yeah, I can't recall having a conversation about who it was going to be, so I'll do it. We've struggled a little bit, I think, getting our heads around just how we link some of this discussion and theory through to actions on the ground, what we're going to do. And I think the conversations that we've had in between meetings, and certainly the last LCP meeting, focused a little bit more on what we might do, and then checking that with the data. So we haven't done the asset mapping yet, but I think that's probably the next thing we need to do. And I think the proto plan that we came out with at the end of the last LCP, and we need to debate a bit more, is it's very difficult to decide whether you're going to go small or large. And I think there's an opportunity in what general practice has to do and in what the pharmacy teams do, in so much as general practice has to do with structured medication reviews on all people with severe frailty. And in our patch, that's about, I would say, about 500-600. And if through that work, which our pharmacy teams do, we tack in some questions about social isolation, depression, and dementia, we could specify a much smaller cohort to pull out So then we can then connect that into our assets in the community, largely around the psychosocial assets that we've got. So we're still looking at, I guess, severe frailty, dementia, falls, if you're looking at the medical aspects, but then trying to pick out those people who are a bit more isolated, depression, anxiety, carer problems, and then trying to get that to third sector sort of solution. Solution's not solved in terms of what we're going to do, and we still need to map assets and things like that, and formally agree all of that. But I think that's where we're tending towards. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think there's no right answer, is there, really, on that whole, do we go big or do we go small? So I think with a lot of the people that did this in wave 1 or wave 2, they tended to go small. They started with a cohort of maybe 30 to 40 people, learned from that, and then expanded out to a larger population. But certainly with Central and with LS 2526 that covers that Garforth Kippax area, they both started with larger groups and then used that to kind of narrow in to get to those people that they felt really need some additional support or something different doing with them. And I think that whichever way you do it, it's really important that we're talking data today, that we look at data in that really broad sense. So part of data is what can we pull off our systems, what does the hard data tell us, but then there's that softer intelligence that's equally important. And it sounds, Chris, like that's very much the approach that you're likely to take, that in having some of those conversations with the people that you're doing medication reviews with anyway, that it really gives you the opportunity to get that softer intelligence and then further target down. So definitely an interesting approach. Laura, I can see that you have appeared on my screen and I believe you have volunteered to do Morley feedback.
Yes, that's correct. Hello. Yeah, so it won't take very long. So in Morley, the data as a starting point showed us that in the moderate frail category, we had higher levels of people with diabetes, falls, and mobility and transfer issues. That's what the data was telling us. So that's the kind of cohort we're focusing on. I can't remember the exact numbers identified. So we had a look at the biosocial psychomodel, apologies, not sure of the correct order of it, and identified particular organisations that fall within each of those categories, but also recognising that actually, they are cross-cutting. Even health will focus on some of the other aspects of a person's life and who they are as an individual. I think what was interesting was that we did the survey for local people as well, and in terms of their responses and what features highly in terms of what's important to people as they get older, it was very much about their independence, getting out, family, friends. So it's very much about the social. So while we sort of recognise that we're using the data about identifying a particular cohort who might benefit from some kind of intervention, that the social aspect is really quite important to people. So I think that's about it, really. That's as far as we've got. So we just identified the organisations we might want to make connections with and bring into the pilot, and make sure that we understand what organisations do and what the potential barriers are, which around Morley tends to be around transport and accessibility.
Great, thanks, Laura. I'm sure there's a few people in some of the other areas that are part of Wave 3 that are nodding at the transport and accessibility challenges as well. I definitely think it's something that a number of the Wave 3 LTPs have got in common with each other. And I think that you're right, it's so important, isn't it? Part of that biopsychosocial model, the importance of it is making sure that we don't lose sight of that sociological aspect of it. And great that you were able to go back to some of the feedback that you'd had from the people that you talked to as part of that kind of first exercise that we did after workshop 1, and really look at what's important to people and think about how that fits with it all as well. And I think that, yeah, you're right, when you look at things like independence and then you start to look at some of the challenges like transport, that some of these things really start to go hand in hand with each other. And also I know a few local care partnerships have they've struggled in some ways with this exercise, in that it's very hard to put yourself in a box in reality as professionals. There's none of us sit in any one box, and shouldn't really, that would be very limiting if we didn't consider holistically the person that's in front of us. But yeah, thanks. It sounds like Morley have also done some really great work in between workshops. I'm going to come to Wetherby now. Do we have a volunteer to speak for Wetherby?
Hi, I'm gonna go through Wetherby's one.
Thanks, Hannah.
Let me see if I can share my screen. So can you see that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so Wetherby focused on that biopsychosocial and did a lot of work around kind of mapping it in the area. So on this document, there's the blue is for third sector and green is for informal support, and kind of the assets that they have in their area and places that they might need to work on as well. So for the bio, there's stuff about meds, exercise, personal care, and then all the different people who are involved in that, including informal carers and self-management. I think that was keen to be in all of them as well. For psycho, stuff about physical health limitations impacting on mental health, fear of falling, and then again, the kind of organizations and partners that should be involved in that and can be supporting there. And again, kind of for the informal support, the importance of co-production and co-design with people. And then for social, talking about what local people said mattered to them, so the homework from before, and again, kind of third sector and self-motivation and peer support for people. So I think that's kind of, yeah, what they were focusing on for Wetherby. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that feedback, Hannah. I think we're starting to see some really common themes emerge here in some of the things, both in terms of what's important to people, but also regardless of where we might be going with the cohort in terms of the kind of deficits that might have been thrown up through the model, that there's certain key things from a medical perspective that we would be looking at as well. So the things like medication reviews are kind of popping up as something key in a number of different local care partnerships at the moment. I can see, Pablo, that I've completely lost my audience that I can see on the screen, as they have been drawn to your amazing backdrop that is going on. So I understand that if we are not all diverted too much by you getting potentially eaten before your feedback, I presume you're here to feedback for Armley this morning.
Yes, I was getting ready, so I was getting the camera ready, and obviously I got my pet in the background.
Excellent.
So if I get to the 3 slides, I wanted to show. Oh, sorry, it's not. So I hope that you can see the slide.
Yeah, we've got that one now.
Okay, just a couple of things. So we found that obviously our population is more white British, less BMI, more young, but still there's a lot of significant disease. And among them, we just found that asthma and COPD were the largest proportion compared to other areas of Leeds. And as well, obviously, we have got a considerable amount of social vulnerability. So we can choose just a very small group all together, or you can work in bigger areas with asthma, COPD. But this is just as far as we're doing. We have not done the asset mapping yet. We are just finding exactly where we're going to focus.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it, when you start to look at the different trends that emerge and then you start to overlap them and look at where where you have or haven't got crossovers between different conditions. And I think it really helps you to start to focus down. So once you get to 11 individuals, then you've definitely got a very workable number to find out what is going on there. I think that your cohort is really quite different as well. So things like asthma coming up and that kind of reflection of a bit younger cohort than maybe some of the other areas that are part of wave 3. So yeah, sounds like you are in a really great position for today's session, where we're going to start to get more into that data, making sure that you've all got the data you need to get started, thinking about how you get it from the systems and turn it into actual people, and then starting to think about how we design interventions and we measure success. So thank you again, everybody, for doing the work in between the workshops. It really does help in terms of trying to keep us on track and get the most out of the programme. And thank you very much to all of you that fed back today. It was great to get those kind of snippets from the different partnerships of what is going on. So I am now going to hand back to Graham, who is going to take us into the world of data.
Thank you very much, Kim. Yes, the world of data. But first, and some of you will have seen this, so just sit back and enjoy it. I think I want to try and get you to think slightly differently about data and what it means and why we use data and why we measure and how we can use it to essentially prove that we are making stuff better. But part of this, I think, is around thinking differently, kind of creating a bit of a movement around how we look at data. And I want to show you this video, if that's okay. So bear with me a second. Okay, here we go.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not 2 nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
So there you go. Maybe we could transform a lone nut into a leader, whoever that might be. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought. Any comments? I love that video. I think it kind of encapsulates the message that I'm trying to get across to you, really. Not that I'm a shirtless dancing guy. No one wants to see that. But hopefully you'll be able to see there is a different way of doing stuff. So stop laughing. So I'm just gonna. I've got some slides. Again, ask some questions in the chat if you like, or just chip in. So this is quite a famous quote, and we'll be probably referencing a couple of dead blokes, all dead white guys. Not sure what that means. But the guy that we're going to probably reference most is Edward Deming, and certainly Walter Shewhart. And Deming said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." I'm not a particularly religious guy, but I can get behind the bringing data. And Deming is quite an interesting story. As an American, he actually championed the work of Walter Shewhart. So Shewhart came first in the early part of the 20th century and was most famous in helping post-war Japan rebuild its industry to become the economy that it is today. And all these three guys and some others all had a hand in developing the ideas of quality improvement and how we make stuff better, or how we prove that we're making stuff better. So he's quite a wise chap, this Edwards Deming. Don't expect smart people to listen to you without proof. Fair point. And you can probably get behind that. So he created this system of profound knowledge, which sounds a bit grand to me, but essentially works on the principle that every system is made up of related people and processes who work together, and that the success of that system depends on the ability to manage those components successfully. So he kind of theorized that there's four elements. You need an appreciation of the system, a knowledge of variation. So we'll talk about variation a bit later, which is where you need your piece of paper. You need a theory of knowledge, you need some basic understanding, and you need some psychology. And they're quite high level. There are some others. So I came across this guy, Myron Rogers, and some of you might be aware of his work. So I came across him when I was working, and Chris will have met him as well, at the Leeds Institute for Quality Healthcare at Leeds University. And I quite like Myron's maxims. There's something you can kind of get behind. And hopefully these will resonate with you as we kind of think about how we do system change. So people own what they help create. I think that's fair to say, that kind of top-down approach. Often that we see in, well, life generally, doesn't always work. A kind of bottom-up approach seems to get better results. Real change happens in real work. So that's really the idea of this program, is that we're giving you some kind of tools, some things to put, some kind of tools to put in your back pocket. But actually we're asking you to actually take that learning and knowledge and actually do some stuff, do some real work. Those who do the work do the change. Yeah, so that kind of bottom-up approach, that certainly works for me. And connect the system to more of itself. So perfect example of that is local care partnerships. Start anywhere, follow everywhere. So we're actually, we're using the data as a starting point, a conversation starter, but just in the feedback that you guys have given just before, you're starting to kind of take that data and then move and go elsewhere, which is fantastic. Go where the energy is, where the energy in the room is. And actually the process you use to get to the future is the future you get. Yeah, if you just keep doing the same stuff, you'll just keep doing the same stuff. So you need perhaps to be that shirtless dancing guy to kind of stand up, perhaps be ridiculed, and change the systems, or at least attempt to change the systems. So those are Myron's maxims. And I think I like the word curiosity. So there's a bit of a definition there. I want you to be curious about data, about stuff, about the systems and how we can change it. So essentially, I'd like you guys to have a bit of a poke around with the data. What makes our systems and processes work or not work, but also be extremely curious about what matters to people. That's that person-centered approach. And we can use data, but that's just one part of the picture. So we've got some numbers here, and who knows what that mythical creature might be if we join those dots. I'm not saying that data and quality improvement is all about unicorns and fairy dust, but we need that bigger picture. We don't just need the data. We need that intelligence, that softer intelligence that we mentioned earlier. So with that in mind, so there's another video that was created by NHS England. There may be some familiar faces on here. If I can find the right one. So just have a listen.
The term population health management can come across as the latest kind of think piece.
Could you guys hear that? Did that sound come through? Yeah, cool. Sorry.
The term population health management can come across as the latest kind of think piece, and something that might put the front line off. Teams in acute hospitals and in primary care and throughout the system need to think of this as a series of capabilities and techniques, and develop the right terminology for them. But actually, this is about looking at the data and making incremental change for patients that supports them to manage their own health better and ultimately have better outcomes. We have a lot to learn from other industries who are using data, using large sets of data to improve their operations and improve their management of their customers in many different ways, and their support to their customers. And at the moment, our predominant use of data in the NHS is to report on what has happened. And we have the potential to use the data on what has happened to help us plan for what is going to happen and to help support patients to avoid it happening in the first place. And we have that potential.
We've got a lot of analysts in our system, and they often didn't speak to each other. They often referred to feeding the beast, doing lots of reports for reasons which were probably very good reasons, but the analysts themselves weren't entirely aware of why they were doing them. And they had this idea of this big faceless beast that they were just doing reports for.
And what we need to do is actually build up the skill base and the capabilities of those analysts, but then link those analysts to now the actual clinical directors of the primary care networks, but also linking those individuals to our management structures. We have that pyramid going forward. We have analysts, you have the management and this governance structure, and then you have the clinicians. And the key thing is that actually you need to get the three of them coming together, because that's where you get that really good working relationship. And when you get the three of them together with the basis of the data, where you can interrogate that data, that's where you get the real transformational changes.
We had a CQC report on the Reading local authority and across the whole health and social network together. And one of the key points of concern raised was the higher number compared to the national average of patients attending A&E in the over 65 age cohort. We've been trying to do various projects to address it, but the arrival of population health management kind of gave us a good steer in trying to get a regression analysis and trying to see how we can identify those patients before they're going to attend the A&E rather than deal with those patients who have already attended A&E many times, because what we were getting to date was retrospective data, and for the first time we had prospective analysis to identify this cohort of patients, working out how many housebound patients I have on my list and how much we're currently spending on them per year. And as we looked at the regression analysis, and we have about 20,000 odd patients who are over 65 in the Reading as a population, out of which I think 2,300 and something patients are housebound. And that is where I think many of the cynics were won over, because we were able to present them with data of patients who are most likely to go into A&E, for example, and put in proactive health management to tackle those patients before a catastrophe were to happen.
Part of the problem we've had previously is that there's a lot of data in our system, a huge amount of data, and it's quite messy. So I'm not going to promise that it's a perfect panacea of everything. It's highly complex, and often I will have been in CCG meetings, and we will be trying to work out what that data actually means. And it's quite easy for us to say, well, we're not quite sure what it means. Is that true data? We're not sure if the measurement's done. Let's send it back to the analysts with a question and meet again in a month's time on our next committee meeting and go from there. Now, I'm not saying that that's the wrong approach, and it's very suitable for certain things, but for population health management, which is done on a lot more of a local level, actually having that link with the analysts, that personal link, you're picking up the phone and talking to them. So by having that personal link with the analysts, we can do things a lot quicker. We can get an honest conversation about what the data can show us. We can start seeing if we can see patterns, whether the complex analysis can identify patterns, whether that holds true with what we're seeing on the ground. So it's coupling that complex analysis with our clinical experience and day-to-day experience of what is happening within our system or within our working lives.
We identified that this is a cohort that is vulnerable. So my project was to come up with a solution which was a practice nurse who would not normally go out to visit patients, normally would only see the patients who come to us, but an extra time to go out and see these patients. So we narrowed the housebound patients down to those with long-term conditions, because again, that was one of the things that was pointed out in the regression analysis, that patients who have COPD and who are housebound, patients who have diabetes and dementia, and those who are housebound, they are at a higher risk of a non-elective admission. So then they have their chronic disease reviews at their own home. They have a care plan, anticipatory care plan, telling us what we should be trying to prevent, what we should be anticipating in terms of if they had a crisis and they were to call a paramedic, what would the paramedic need to know about that particular patient to help them form a decision as to whether this patient needs to be transported to A&E or is there a better alternative available for that patient.
The real positive is definitely the energy. The real positive in the programme is definitely the energy of the 3 or 4 practice leaders who had taken their data, looked at their patients, felt they could do something different, and then actually brought that to fruition. And when they're reporting that back about how they've changed their own ways of working and ways of thinking about use of data and intelligence to support their patients better, that's definitely the difference. And seeing that be a team journey, a multidisciplinary team journey between an acute physician in our, in the trust and a GP in the local area, and actually they're doing something different to support patients better. I think that's the real positive from the programme.
Okay, I think my take home from that video was very primary care focused to me, but hopefully you get the idea about using data to that you can plan and predict, and we'll see a bit of that later. Identifying patterns in data, relationships with analysts, I think is also key. I suppose I would say that. But actually, I think what we're doing here in Leeds is kind of bigger than what those guys were doing with our local care partnerships, and engaging right across the system. So how do we get to where we are in Leeds? So we've presented some of this before in the kind of warm-up sessions, but we're here in Leeds. We're pretty lucky that we've got a linked data set called the Leeds data model, and it contains record level data across a range of settings that you can see on that slide. So the data is all linked together, but we're not able to identify an actual person, but we do have the ability to track somebody's care around the Leeds system. So this database enables us to hold everyone that is registered with a GP in Leeds, and actually to put them into segments, into discrete population cohorts, so that we can then further work with those, as we're doing here with people living with frailty. But just a note is that you can only be in one segment at a time, but you can move between segments over time. So that's a little kind of image map of the data sets that we've got in the Leeds data model, and this is the basis for the data packs that we've presented to you. And we've talked before in previous workshops and in the warm-up sessions about thinking big, but starting small. And this is a kind of schematic model of how population health management and the data that we have to support that idea breaks down from a system right at the top, which could be the integrated care system for West Yorkshire and Harrogate, or it could be a place, so Leeds, for example, working down to a neighbourhood or a local care partnership, down to a person. So that kind of golden thread that is linking right from high level to the person, I think is key. Now, the quality of that underpinning data is of course crucial. So if we have high quality data about a person, that aggregates up to high quality data at a neighbourhood, place and system level. And actually it works kind of both ways, up and down that golden thread. So a key reason for Leeds taking this population health management approach is that it provides the city with what they described as a bit of a missing part of the jigsaw in fulfilling the aspiration of the CCG to change the way it commissions and provides services in Leeds to achieve better outcomes for people. And over the last couple of years and beyond, the city, so the Royal We, have been working together to progress on a journey towards PHM and commissioning for outcomes. And that's coming to fruition now with the CCG. So the CCG has a clear strategy and direction towards value-based commissioning and commissioning for population outcomes. But we need to identify our population segments and collectively agree which population segments we will initially work with. And this is a diagram of the 8 population segments that we have in the city. And as I said, you can be in one segment at a time, but you can move between segments. And actually how we decided which segment we would start with first is we asked the system, and you've probably seen this slide before. We used coloured dots to identify, where people thought, or which population segment people thought we should start with first. And people living with frailty is a real cross-cutter across many organisations within Leeds, including the voluntary sector, the third sector. And that was key for the development of the local care partnerships. And if we look at resource utilisation and costs, focusing first on people living with frailty seems to be the right thing to do. So, you know, this large bar around kind of the average events per patient is nearly 40 events per patient. And actually the cost per patient is kind of just over £3,500 per person per year. So it was a good place to start. So again, we're using some evidence to inform that. And actually, the health segment causing the highest part of this kind of increase in spending over time is actually the long-term condition segment, and I think that's possibly the one that we'll have a look at next. But actually, the frailty segment was projected to have a higher percentage increase over the next 5 years. So that's where we started. So I asked my mate George to tell us about his journey. He couldn't join us today, but he sent us a video, and I would like to play his experience with Seacroft around using data.
Hi, my name's George. I'm a GP in Gipton and I'm the clinical director of Seacroft PCN. In a time before MS Teams even existed, and I think before Zoom meetings were widely used, Seacroft was part of the first wave of the population health management approach in Leeds. And we met in Putty Town Hall, and we, probably much like you, were presented with a really phenomenal amount of data to help us understand the needs of our population. And whilst this was incredibly rich and very beautifully explained by some very clever statisticians, I think there's a general sense it was quite overwhelming. And what really helped galvanise us and helped move us on through that data was really just picking one bit and focusing on it. And that bit was the bit that was most unique to us, and we kept that brought us all together. The bit that we chose was the matrix segmentation, graph and chart, because we felt that really demonstrated where the best opportunity was for us to focus our efforts initially. From this segmentation, we could really understood which population to go to first, and we brought that to life by compiling a list of people who fitted that matrix segment, that particular population. And once we had that, and once we'd done some initial work alongside people, understanding what they need, we could really build our team around that and really start to work with people on what they needed. And largely this was people who were already known to services. This was people who were well known to the system. And what we really found was that this data-driven approach found a cohort of people who actually had significant unmet need. And our wonderful team were then able to work alongside them to really understand what their support needs were and to help that. And we found a phenomenal amount of unmet need, and I have a fantastic amount of stories of where we've really made a difference to people's lives. The other thing I wanted to just mention was where we felt we could have done better. So I'm a firm believer in the need to measure to improve, so you can really understand whether what you're doing is working. And we had a commitment at the beginning within our team that we would record relevant data so that we could really evaluate well. And certainly at the outset, I think we did that reasonably well. I think Graham will talk to you about that. But it's become clearer when we try to evaluate more that despite us knowing that what we're doing is awesome, we probably don't have enough data to really support that for the people who want that type of information. So I think my pearls of wisdom to you would be, within that data, there will be something that is really stands out for you or your area, your LCP. And I'd encourage you to just focus on that and work around that. And also, I'd encourage you to measure for success and really make sure that you've got a robust plan in place and you follow that plan. So I wish you the best of luck. This process has been fantastic for the people of Seacroft and forming relationships within this LCP. So good luck. Thanks.
What are you doing up here? I thought you were downstairs back.
That yet? You can't see that video yet. Hang on. Right. So I think hopefully George's message there, that they did a lot of stuff that they're really proud of. They had some fantastic successes. They found a lot of folk with a lot of unmet need, and you know, go and talk to George or the guys in the team at Seacroft. Some of the stories are absolutely fabulous. And measure for success. That's a new phrase that I think I might steal from him. I like that. So how did they take from their data pack? How did they find these people? Now, where are we on here? Now, I was going to do a live demo using a piece of software called Radar, which folk in primary care have access to, but it was too hard on too many laptops, too many logins. So if people need a better demonstration of Radar, then we can do that outside of this meeting. Yeah, I'm just going to pop through a couple of slides. So how did Seacroft, or how did they find their cohort of people? So we've seen this chart before. We've provided you with a whole raft of data, which for each local care partnership, and from that data, from those electronic frailty index measures, which are down on the left hand side, and hopefully this message has been quite clear, we've compared each local care partnership to the Leeds average and identified for your populations any outliers or any variation. So as I've described before, that middle line on that slide is the Leeds position. Anything to the right within this is Morley. Anything on the right of that line has a higher prevalence, and anything on the left of that line has a lower prevalence than the Leeds position. So that gives you a starting point, and really it's have a look at where the biggest bars are. There's nothing more complicated in that. Where are the biggest bars? That is potentially your area of opportunity with a moderately frail cohort within Morley. So again, we're trying to connect from the place to the neighbourhood to the person all the time. And this, I think, was the chart that got Seacroft and George most excited, and kind of initial observations. Most frail patients are moderately frail, with smaller numbers in the kind of moderate or in the mild or severe categories. Most frail patients are 75 years or older, followed by the 60 to 74 age groups. That's a slight sweeping statement because in some LCPs, we do have people who are younger living with frailty, and they tend to be the more deprived local care partnerships. There is a link or a correlation between increasing frailty and increasing spend per person per year. We probably knew that anyway. But this is the kind of place that Seacroft started to get interested, looking at how old people are and how many long-term conditions they were living with. So Seacroft were actually looking at people with moderate frailty, age 60 to 75, 5 or more long-term conditions, including COPD, cardiovascular disease. They had initial list size that they identified of about 50 people. And what they were trying to do was to create a meaningful care plan based on some work that happened over in New Zealand, and also to have their staff trained in the Better Conversations idea, which again Hannah talked about in the very first workshop, that Better Conversations training is available to all of you guys, all local care partnerships, and they were testing the role of the care coordinator. So one of the kind of the quotes on impact, data helped the local care partnership think about their population as a whole, supporting personalised care. Going through this together is as important as the outcomes. It's a stepping stone to becoming a team. Now we're talking about proactive care. You need that mind shift. So there's a comment, hopefully, if I'm not taking it out of context, from Councillor Gruen, about how we can change mindsets and outcomes for patients. So that's in the chat. So yes, how can we change those mind shifts? So looking at Beeston, how did they identify their cohort? So they decided to look at moderate frailty, age 65 plus. So that means the electronic frailty index is validated for the over 65s. And they started to look at COPD diagnoses or respiratory disease. And then they also were looking at, so they're around that proactive care, in that proactive care model, could we find people that weren't particularly known to services currently? And that's what Seacroft were doing, and they found lots of unmet need. So within the kind of analyst community between the CCG and the City Council, we're able to help you guys develop searches within the primary care systems. So again, the way that we're finding people for this cohort is from the GP registered list. That is the underlying data, which also feeds into the Leeds data model, but we are using the GP registered lists, and we can create searches in EMIS, in System 1, for you guys to then find and identify the people that you want to work with. So only primary care can find those people because they hold the list. And I think there's also been a bit of a shift, certainly in wave 3, is looking at health inequalities. So there is a vision within Leeds that Leeds will be a healthy and caring city for all ages, where people who are the poorest improve their health the fastest. So if we link to that agenda, we can actually start to then break down our cohorts into different ways. So not just what conditions they have, but actually where they live, and that has an impact on also on their kind of opportunities and health inequalities. So we know where these people live. We don't know who they are, but we know where they live generally in a neighbourhood within your local care partnership. So we can identify the more deprived parts, or how deprived parts of your local care partnership are, using something called the index of multiple deprivation. I'm not going to go into how that is created, but it's a kind of a standard way of identifying more or less deprivation. So here's a map of Bramley, Wortley and Middleton primary care network, and we've just shaded things called lower level super output areas, which are an area or a neighbourhood of about 1,500 people, and we've shaded those into the deciles of deprivation. So decile 1, which is the red that you can see on this map, is the most deprived parts, or the 10% most deprived nationally. That's where they are. Decile 10 is the least deprived decile. So we can begin to identify where people live according to their deprivation. We can also slice and dice the data from the Leeds data model that underpins all this work into deprivation deciles. We can compare your local care partnership to the Leeds position. So we can see here we're comparing spend per person per year in Morley for the moderate frail people or cohort. So just looking at that again, the bigger bars are interesting. Morley is spending more for those people living in IMD Decile 5 compared to the rest of Leeds. So, you know, this is interesting. What's going on with the people with moderate frailty who live in IMD Decile 5 that we're spending more on them? it could, hopefully, that piques your interest and curiosity. And comparing this chart to the previous slide, interestingly, there are less moderately frail people in IMD decile 5, yet we're spending more on them. So why is that? Why are there less people, but we're spending more on them? What are those conditions that those people have? And we can then go and find those people. And perhaps that could be our cohort of interest. So in a similar way, we can also map index of multiple deprivation for Morley. And then we've seen a Venn diagram, which I remember from GCSE maths. How can we kind of create our cohorts and where do they intersect? So again, we're narrowing this down all the time. So this is just the people with moderate frailty, just the people in IMD decile 3, just the people in Morley. So we're really narrowing it down, and we've taken 3 conditions. So we've got a kind of medical and social combination here, and we're able to intersect those people. So as we saw on a previous slide from Pablo, in that middle segment, we've got 5 people, which is, we could do something interesting with those people, but those are the sort of numbers that we could possibly be working with in our cohorts. So where is IMD decile 3? Those are those lower level super output areas within Morley that are in IMD decile 3. We could go and find those people that live there. People with local knowledge will know, will know the area better than me. I did say that I was going to use radar, but I'm not. It's a very similar tool to the primary care systems, but I couldn't get that working on multiple laptops. When we've identified our cohort, we actually want to ask their permission for them to be part of this program. And we've developed a template which is deployed within the primary care systems that essentially we want you to flag, put a little read code or a little flag against those people within our cohort. So then in future, we can track their care and track the change in their care around the lead system. So we need to identify these people to enable us to find out the impact of this program. So there's a couple of templates in both EMIS and System 1. There's ongoing work to make these templates better and more accessible to you guys and for storing information. There's been lots of work on the back of what Seacroft have done. We've created a template called What Matters to Me, and we're trying to bring all these different templates together because it just makes it easier. So with that in mind, that is a brief run through where we are in terms of data, how we got to where we are, how we identify a cohort, and what consent we need. So again, the slides will be available. Feel free to ask questions. But our first group exercise this morning. So if you remember how you break out into groups, if you go into the teams icon on the left hand side, you'll see that some of the LCP development team will have started a meeting within your local care partnership. So if you don't end this meeting, but you can join another meeting, have your discussions in there, take the opportunity to have a break, get a cup of tea, have a comfort break, have a brief discussion around this question. So to fully understand our cohort, do we need any more data? You might think you've got enough. Have we identified our cohort? Is there anything else that we need to know before we can move on to designing interventions? So at that point, I'd like you to come back at 20 past 10. We're not going to feed back any of these discussions. So if I just show you what I mean about Teams. So in Teams, if you click on there, and within this population health management Microsoft team, there are some meetings that have started. So if you were Morley, click on Morley and hit join. And don't hang up this call. When you've finished your discussions in Morley, hang up that call and you'll return back to the main hall. So I'll see you in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.